Hi YouTube, welcome back to another video from WTFRC Cars. So today we're going to crack on with the build of the HB Racing D2 Evo, and we're going to start on bag D, which is the diff. We've already done bag A, which is rather nice shocks, and quite happy to see that they aren't leaked. But let's bring you in for a close-up look and see how we get on with build. Right, so you're going to get all your diff parts all in one bag. So it's been quite a nice, good build so far. The shocks all in one bag, and as you work through manual, it pretty much seems that's the way it's going to be. So first off, you want to get one of your output cups. You've got your diff case, so we're going to pop that on. And they've already got a little bit of bearing grease in there, or oil, so it should be fine just to carry on building this way. We're definitely going to need a gasket, so you want to place your gasket in, and then we're going to want to make sure it's lined up with the holes. And I'm just using a 1.5mm hex driver, and you can just poke it through holes and line it up. Then we're going to want one of those little tiny O-rings. Then I like to get a tiny bit of as sort of as diff grease or as diff silicone, put that around bearing, around the O-ring. Then you're going to want to slide your output cup through it. Once we've got the output cup through, so you then want to get one of your tiny drive pins, and we're going to pop that through. Then you want to get one of your gears, and we're going to drop that into place. So basically you've just built that. Then we're going to move on to our next one, and you can put a little bit of grease or oil on them, but it doesn't tell you to. And quite nice that these bearings will actually fit over the output cups. Then again, we're going to need a little drive pin, and you just want to make sure that O-ring is sat down nicely so you're not pinching anything. Then we can drop on another gear. Then you're going to want to line up your drive gear, so we're going to pop that on. You're going to want to line this up with the screw holes, and you want to make sure you're not getting your gasket out of line. Then you're going to take 4 of the tiny little diff screws, and we're going to get all these screwed in. So I'll get all them screwed in. Right, so once you've got all your diff screwed in, this is going to be a fun one, because none of this feels like it wants to stay together. But once we've got it to that stage, we're then going to get one of those little cross beams, and for this you're going to want a gear and then a shim on the back of it. You're going to want another gear and another shim. Then we're going to drop the whole thing in place, and you're going to want the little flat to be facing upwards. Then we're going to build the opposite one. And then this time you're going to want this one face down with the flat, so it sits level with the one that you've already got in place. Then just slide the gears back. You can check it, make sure there's no binding or anything. And then basically you're going to get your diff silicone or diff grease, and I make sure I get some down the back of the gears. And then you're going to want to slowly fill this up, and it wants to sit so it's just above the cross in the middle. And then I like to try and work it round a little bit, make sure it gets into all the little crevices. Then push the cross beams down, and then you can just add the last few little bits. And there's not really any point going much above the centre cross beam, because by the time you've got this gear sat in there, you're just going to put it together and it's all just going to try and push out of your gaskets. But you can tell when you've got it right, because it pretty much looks level in the centre. You don't want it to be trying to raise up. Then once we've got that done, you can drop that gear in, and if you look around it you can see if you've got any gaps. You can just put a tiny bit more grease in there if you like. You don't want to fill this up because it needs to have a little bit of expansion room. Then you can carefully line your diff casing up, and then we're going to close it up with the 4 remaining screws. And I like to go in a cross pattern with these as I'm tightening it up, and then you know it's tightening down perfectly flat. Don't over tighten these, because you have got tiny little threads and they're only going into a plastic gear, so if you try and go a bit heavy-handed with them, you're definitely going to strip the threads, and then your diff is not going to want to stay together. And they shouldn't be under too much force, because if HB Racing's got the diff design right, the diff case will actually be holding the bearings and holding everything together. So I'll tighten this up and see what else we've got. Right, so moving on to the turnbuckles. We've got a whole bag of these ends. These are all in the C bag. You've got 2 of the turnbuckles that are ever so slightly shorter, so these are 44mm. Then you've got 2 sets that are both 48. We're going to build the front ones up to 23mm. We're going to build the middle ones up to 28.2mm, and the rear ones 27.8mm. So these are all pretty easy to put together, and basically I just like to get them started, and then I'll get one at shock spanners and just tighten everything up. I just like to spin them back so it lines it up, and then get them started. And you're going to build these. I've got the little tiny markings on the turnbuckle centres, So I've got all them facing the outside. So I'll get these built up and see what else we've got. Right, so if you like me, I hate building these things, but basically this is the way around it's telling us to do them. So you want the front ones facing forward and down, and they're 23mm. And if you notice all these, there's no threads showing, so if you start building them up, just past the threads and work from there. The next ones, we want same again. You want these facing down and these facing out. And then the last two, which are 27.8mm, these are both facing down. The centre ones, they're built to 28.2mm. And you will find it a lot easier. This is a 3.7mm turnbuckle wrench, and that fits perfect. So let's see what else we need. Right, so moving along, we are on to bag D. We've seen some very nice components in here. The battery tie downs are carbon. You've got the little aluminium parts that go on the back. They look like bump stops. They are marked L and R. So which way round is it expecting us to look at it though? I mean, for me, right hand side is that side because that's your right wheel. So I guess that's way round it's going to go. And it looks like these screw on from the top of the chassis, but it's not saying use thread lock. So let's have a look what size heads these are. So these are 1.5mm. And you're using the smallest of the button head screws to get these on. I'm not used to seeing droop screws on 10 scales. And nice to see that they have made these replaceable, because if your bump screws are running on these all the time, they can wear them down. Nice that they're good quality aluminium parts. Right, next off we're going to mount this, and I'm going to build everything to the stock spec first off, and then drive it and see if we need to change anything. So we're going to be mounting these up, and it's the second hole in from the end on both sides. So we'll get them screwed down. Right, so that's as battery retaining posts, if you like, held down. The next thing we're going to do is be mounting these onto the chassis. So they're going to go on there, and all we've got to do is put all the screws in. So let's see if we can get this into position. You do have a nice sort of ridge all the way down there that'll help as a chassis protector as well. And these, same as the screws to the battery retainers, these are all 2mm heads, and it was a 1.5mm for the tiny little droop screw sort of standoffs. But up to now, the components of the vehicle seem every bit as good as any of the X-Ray cars I've built, if not better. You certainly get more aluminium and carbon fibre with it. But I'll get these screwed down and then we'll crack on. And just to give you some idea of what it's like to follow these instructions, this is bag E, which come bagged together, but you've got step 1 and step 2. So you're not getting any of the components mixed up between them. So let's start with step 1, and I'll get all this laid out and we'll crack on. So this is how they actually came in the bag, but if yours doesn't, the inserts just drop in like that. Then we've got the tiny little button head screws that go all the way round. And for a 10 scale set of arms, these look really impressive. They look like they'll take some hammer around the track, and they are nice and chunky, but they don't feel too heavy, which is one of the sort of things that I was slightly concerned with when I looked at this RC. It seemed like it'd be heavy, but I mean, the chassis doesn't really weigh much. So these are all 1.5mm hex head, and then our little droop screws are 2mm, and it tells you to screw these in, and the initial setting for them is just flush with the bottom. So if you just screw them in flush with that, and then we need to get all these screwed down. So I'll just get this one dropped in, and you can see I'm just screwing it so it's flush, but we'll get these screwed in and then move on to the next step. Right, so moving on to these. Initial position in the setup is calling for these pills to be 1 dot to the outside. The initial position of I believe these are the shock mounts, but these are to the inner pin. Again, mine came out the box, or out the bag should I say, with these inserts already in, but that's the way they go. So we're going to be putting 6 of these little screws in, and we're going to want them in each one. Then you're going to want your droop screw to be placed in, and again it's saying initial setting just flush. You're going to want that screwing into the innermost, and this, same as all these, is 1.5mm, and then the initial setup sheet I believe is calling for them to be inserted with the dot to the outside. So basically dot to outside, dot to outside, your screws in, this one's going flush, and then you want to screw this in. So we'll get that done for both these. You've got the pills with the 2 dots that initially we're not going to be using, so you want to keep them safe. And I did get a extra little button screw with this set, so I would suggest anything that you get spare, you want to put in a little sealer bag and keep safe. But we'll get these screwed in and then we'll crack on. Right, so that's got his arms all assembled, and we've just got the little pills to pop into the last one, and the depth you want to screw this into is 12mm, so you just want that to stand at 12mm. But they are really nice. Certainly the components that make up this RC are extremely high quality, at least so far. So let's see what we've got next. Right, so first off, we're definitely going to need this bolted to the RC. So you're going to want the 3 longer screws that come with bag F. Now I'm not envisioning taking this off a lot, so I'm going to drop a little bit of thread lock onto these, because they are going into aluminium, and if it's on an RC and it can vibrate and come undone, it probably will vibrate and come undone. So I've just put a little bit of blue thread lock on these, and then we get them all screwed down. And all these parts are aluminium, so extremely high quality again. And since we've got thread lock on them, you haven't got to go crazy over tightening them. And we'll just get the excess thread lock off. So that's that part mounted. Then you're going to want to mount this to the front. So again, I'm just going to get a tiny bit of thread lock, and we're going to want to mount this. And yet again, this is a fully aluminium part. And I'm thread locking this because I don't want all my suspension and steering components shaking apart. And it is always good to have a bit of thread lock when it's aluminium into aluminium, or any kind of metal screw into metal, because you can guarantee if you don't thread lock them, they will vibrate loose. And it's bad enough losing a race if it's your own skill that falls short, but you definitely don't want to be losing a race because your RC car shook itself to pieces. So I just wipe the excess off again. Right, so the initial setup is calling for the central position. So again, just going to put a tiny bit of thread lock on these. And the initial setup book is asking for one of the orange spaces on each one of these and the center holes. So you do get 2 of the orange spaces with it for each side. But as I say, I'm following the initial setup, and that's what it's asking us to go for. And these are 2mm, so I'll just get these nipped up. And it is really nice that, one, you get the sort of higher quality anodized spacers and shims rather than just stock parts. But also nice that you get the extra ones, even though the initial setup is telling us to just go with 1 shim on each one of these. So, on to the next. Right, so this steering bit might look a bit confusing, but hopefully seeing it laid out like this should make more sense. So, from what I can tell, we start off with 2 of these and the tiny little orange shims or washers. And then when we come to this part, you want the recesses at the top. So we put these in from the top, and they should sit ever so slightly proud. The bottom has just got a tiny recess, and I believe that is for the tiny little washer or shim that's on the bottom, so that can go in and sit level. But it looks like we put that in there and then that in that one, and these should be 2mm. Yeah, it looks like they are. Right, so hopefully this makes a lot more sense. So that's how it goes together. You have the insert sat flush, the little shims going bottom, your screws go through it, and you'll have it that way round facing forward. Then we're going to need to put the smaller one of these in. So I'll just quickly get that screwed down. And then we just want to nip these up just to take any play out of them, but you don't want to You don't want to tighten these to the point where they don't want to move freely. So they feel nice. Then we're going to move on to these, and the initial setup is asking for one little shim. And because these are metal into metal, I'm going to go with a bit of thread lock, so we don't have to try and over tighten them down. Can just nip them up. So that is how you want to end up with this part assembled. Little orange shims, the smaller tiny little orange washers in the bottom, and that wants to face forward, and you don't want these tightening up to the point that they're trying to crush it, because the tighter you have that, the harder your steering servo's got to work, and you can feel when they nip down. But there's no play in them, but they will move about really freely. Right, so let's see what it's asking us to do next. We are going to have to assemble as bearings into here, and I've already put a tiny bit of bearing oil on these. So we want to start off with one bearing in the bottom on each. And then it looks like it's asking us to drop these in the center, and then we're going to need to close it up with a bearing. Then it looks like it's asking us to fit this with the beveled side down, which would make sense because it's got the countersunk parts in the top for these screws, the longer ones, and we're going to pop that through. And then right, so we've got everything assembled, so then we're going to get the steering into place, and it lines up on these two little raised ones. And because we've got a bit of thread lock on these, you can nip these down, but then you don't have to go crazy tight with them, because the thread lock's going to do its work and keep these in place for us. And I must admit, that is one of the smoothest steering mechanisms that I've come across in an RC, and there is absolutely zero play in it. So, carrying on being extremely impressed with this build. But we are looking like we're getting somewhere. It's looking more RC shaped. So, let's carry on. Right, so carrying on, it looks like we are now going to mount this. So let's see how well that goes into place. Looks like it's going to fit well. Clips in, it's really sturdy. So you have a bunch of 12mm screws, and they are all for coming through the shock body. Then we've got some 10mm screws, which we won't need thread lock on the two rear ones because these are going into plastic. Then if you flip it over, got two 10mm screws, and it's telling us to put these through the bottom of the aluminium part on here. So I'll just put these into position and then show you where they go. So these go all the way inside there, and they screw into this, so we don't need any thread lock on those either. So let's get them tightened down and the top two tightened down. Right, so that's these top two and the two underneath all tightened down. Now we're going to be fitting the shock mount, or the shock tower should I say, and this one we're going to be using the 12mm screws. So let's see if we can get one of these started to at least hold it in position. Now you can seal the side of carbon parts with CA glue, same as what you seal the tyres with. You can just run it round here. I've done it on some of the RCs and some of them I haven't, and I've noticed absolutely no difference whatsoever in the ones where I have and I haven't. Maybe if you're running it on a more abrasive surface where you might be hitting this shock tower, it may stop it splaying open a little bit, but it's definitely yet to be seen. I haven't noticed any difference with it, but you can do it if you want, and it'd possibly stop little splinters coming off and getting in your fingers. But we want the two with the washers on at the top, two 12mm at the bottom, and then we've got to put our shock tower mounts. And if we just flick to the build guide, the front one, it's saying go with the center positions first. Now these, because it's a metal screw into metal shock tower standoffs, I am going to put a tiny bit of thread lock on them again, and it is telling us to use these longer screws for these standoffs, and they do look crazy long, to be honest. It's not telling us to put any shims on them or anything, so, and they are the only two remaining screws. I'm not sure if this is for adjustability, but they are the 22mm ones, and it's not showing you to use any spacers. So we need to get these tightened up, and we need to get these four on the front, and then we'll carry on. Right, so this is the way around it's showing us to fit them. So you want your shock mounts and everything to the back. The kit comes with the Zero, which I believe is 27.5 degrees caster, and obviously with it being Zero, it don't matter which way around you flip it, it's still going to be the same. There is other ones available, and you can flip them to give you a different caster. So looking at this, the first thing we're going to want to do is get the two rear screws into here. So they're going to be these little button head screws, and I'm going to drop a tiny bit of thread lock on these because it's metal on metal. And these are going to be a 2mm hex drive, so hopefully I get these the right way around. The instructions aren't bad on these. The only bit that's slightly confusing, or maybe to people, is where you put the shims, because it's a bit awkward to see in the actual manual for the setup sheet, but I believe I've got this right. So our stock should be one of the shims at either side. So they're quite an interesting way of getting the arms on in these. But we then need to get our tiny little grub screw, and again I'm going to thread lock this. And then we're going to put that in place, and that should hold his arm on. Then we're going to get his other arm. There is an awful lot of adjustability in these things, which is really impressive. And all the way through building it, up to now, it feels more like what you'd expect from an 8th scale, not a 10th scale. So it certainly goes some way to justifying the price of it, as all these components are all metal. So we then get that in. Let's just make sure they're both tight, because that is holding your hinge pins in. That's going to hold your actual suspension together. Then we're going to be putting this top cap in place, and again this is going into aluminium, so I'm going to pop a little bit of thread lock on these. And it does look like this cover would come down on the grub screws. So it looks like it just touches the edge of them. So hopefully it should stop them vibrating out. If you thread lock, or if you forget to thread lock them, it does just cover them, so it should stop them coming out. But I think you would still be able to get the screwdriver to them if you just needed to nip them up. But you would be removing that to take them out anyway, unless them pins could come out backwards, but you'd have a hard time pushing them through. But basically that is our front suspension, and that looks really nice. The way the droop screws come down onto the plate for changing your caster, so again that's really nice. But definitely getting a feel for this build so far, and the quality of it is absolutely fantastic. There just doesn't seem to be any sort of loose play or movement in any of parts. But let's crack on with build. Right, so putting these together, it's telling us we want the insert from that side. We've then got these with a spacer, and these are going to be going towards the front, and stock build calls for them on the innermost position. And again, these are all aluminium, so we've got metal screws into metal, so I'm going to put a little bit of thread lock on them. Then we have one of these little screws that sit in the back. Not entirely sure what these are for yet. I don't know if these are just bump stops, possibly. So these are going to be 2mm screws. And you want a 0 degree in that one. So again, we will do this side one. then we're going to want a tiny bit of thread lock on this screw that goes in the back. And as I say, I'm not got to the part where it tells us what that's for yet, but I'm guessing it's some kind of bump stop, possibly for steering, for when you're setting your endpoints. So once we've got them in position, it's telling us that these fit in from the front, and it's not asking for a spacer in the front of this yet, but it is asking for one of these orange shims or spacers, a 1mm one in the rear. Let's see if I can work out how to get that in position. There we go. And then on the back of it all, we've got the little lock nut. So that's a 2mm in one side, and how big is this lock nut? 5mm. So we just want to do that one, and then get exactly the same put on this side. So again, we've got the 1mm spacer towards the rear. And there's little ball joints on the innermost holes. So let's see if I can show you that. So basically that's what it's asking for, the 0 degree insert, 1mm shim behind this and on the innermost holes, and then just your 1mm spacer behind on both sides on that one. And it looks like it's got quite a wide stance at that. But let's carry on. Right, so it's now telling us to fit the front arms that we built up, and these have got the little notches to the outside. So let's see how easy or difficult these clip into space. Yeah, they don't feel too bad. And same on this side, I'm going for the outermost position with the little line. So where that little line is, I've got that towards the outside of the vehicle. They're not too bad to clip on, but we'll have to set all them up as we get through the build. But it is looking quite nice. So let's crack on with the next part. Right, so on we're building the little uprights, and these are marked left and right. So it looks like the first thing we're going to need to do, or one of them at least, is get 2 of the 8mm screws with the 2mm hex into here. And these always look way more complicated than they are, but it's then telling us we need, for the stock build, we want 2 of these 1mm shims to be on the top of the steering, and just the nut on its own on the bottom. So again, this is going to be 2mm, and then we've got a nut on the end that's a 5.5. So we'll nip that up. Then we've got a bearing in either side of this, and I've already put my bearing oil in these. So you just need to make sure they're sat in. Then we want one of these 1mm spacers and slide that on. Then another 1mm spacer on the inside. Then you've got a little 6mm domed edge screw, and we're going to want a little bit of thread lock on this so we don't get those wheels escaping. And I'm going to screw that in to hold everything together. And the thread lock should hold that nice and tight. Then just going to check on our setup sheet. So it is the thicker of the inserts sits in the bottom of your C-hub, the thinner in the top. Then you want to place your hub in, and then you've got these long screws that are going to sit all the way through it. I'll just turn it so you can see the thicker one to the bottom. Now this, you're just going to have to play around with the tightness of these till you get it so there's no, you're not trying to crush it. So again, with this side you want the 8mm screws in, I believe they're 8 or 6. Sure these are 8mm. These little arms have numbered dots on them. And again, we're going to want to tighten this up with 2 of the 1mm shims on it. And we're going to want a bearing in either side. We're going to want one of our 1mm spacers and sit that on. Another 1mm spacer, then a little bit of thread lock. And we screw the whole thing together. And then again for this side, thicker shim to bottom, thinner one to top. And we just place it in. And get screws in place. And we just need to tighten these down. And then lastly, should be able to get our steering arms in place. They definitely take some snapping into place. So that's got a steering And it looks like I guessed right, the little screws on the back do look like they're the bump stops. Probably to stop the steering binding up. But there we have it. It is looking quite nice. Got quite nice free steering mechanism and the suspension. There you have it. That is the end of bag F. Everything's fitted, it's all built up, it's looking nice, and I think that video is going to be long enough, so we'll call it a day at that one and wrap this one up. So there we have it. We've got front suspension built up and shock tower. I've just got the shocks, but I believe next we'll be moving on to the rear arms. We've got a diff built up, we've got the shocks built up, we've got 2 more of these adjustable turnbuckles built up, but up to now I am really impressed with the build quality of it. As I've said, it feels more like you're building an 8th scale than a 10th scale. Everything seems really solid and really well built, really chunky. There's not that much weight in it yet though. We do have the Sky RC scale, so once I've got it fully built up I will give you an idea of what its weight distribution is of the stock build with battery in it and everything and body shell on. But thanks again for watching WTF RC Cars. If you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to like, subscribe, share to friends and family, and follow if you want to see how this thing turns out. Catch you guys again in the next one.